my name is Anya Petrov, and the night I decided to stop being the person who took what was given to her, instead of taking what she deserved, I understood how thin the skin is between being loved and being used. I could feel it, like a membrane that, once pierced, leaked everything out. Trust, warmth, a past stitched into photos and playlists, the future we spoke about over coffee at 2 in the morning. What remained after the puncture was a quiet, cold clarity. I met Mark on a rainy Thursday in October. He was tall in a way that made people assume he was confident. He laughed at the right moments and could make any coffee shop waiter feel like a character in his own sitcom. Sophie I'd known since university, smiled too easily around him, the way someone who hadn't chosen her words carefully might. They had chemistry that was easy and bright in public, and private that was bright and poisonous. For a long time I told myself their warmth was a mirror held up to me. If they were happy, I must be happy. It was an economy of feeling I could afford to live on because I was stupid, or because I wanted to be, or because it was less painful than asking questions. The discovery was stupid too. A message thread left open on Mark's laptop, a name that shouldn't have been in bold, the timestamp glowing like a dare. It was Sophie. Their messages were blisteringly casual, the kind of intimacy that leans on inside jokes and small cruelties, the kind that eats towns out of your bones when it's not for you. I remember the first message I read, "Can't stop thinking about last night." No stage directions. No cinematic reveal. Just a line like a breath that had already run away. I could have left. The script for such things is well worn. Gather your dignity, pack a bag, delete his number, move to a city where no one knows you. But I had been waiting for that patch of clarity my whole life, and no clarity in me stitched itself to leaving. Instead, I found a new, colder option, to watch. To learn. To let the betrayal be a vector through which I could reorder everything. I started small, the way a surgeon begins with a scalpel rather than an axe. I watched. I took every trivial detail as a piece of evidence. Sophie's laugh had a certain pitch in the mornings when she texted Mark. 4 notes, like a tiny bell. Mark always left his phone unlocked, which I used the way small children sneak cookies. I made playlists and pretended to send them to him, then watched his reactions. I took photos of receipts from cafes they visited together and matched the times. I learned their patterns like a pattern that could be decoded into a weapon. If someone's life is a house, I mapped the corridors of theirs, where the light fell at 3 in the afternoon, which curtains they left half open when they lied, the place on Sophie's bookshelf where she kept the diary she thought I'd never read. I watched their friendship the way you watch a ship that's about to collide with rocks, because you can see it, and you know what will happen, and you choose whether to warn them or to let the inevitable occur. I chose the latter. The first real plan was a simple test. If their betrayal could be proven, could it be used? Could it be made public in a precise way, surgical and clean, so that no one could say I'd broken anything? Public humiliation is crude revenge. I wanted something more refined. I wanted to take their future, not their reputation. Mark managed a small team at a marketing agency. Sophie freelanced as a photographer. Both were people of public-facing lives where a whisper could become a headline. So I set about making them each step on the same landmine. I began by being very helpful. People who want revenge seldom think to hide inside kindness. Kindness is disarming. I cooked dinners that Mark loved, left his shirts with a faint smell of lemon and laundry soap, that domestic perfume that makes people feel rootless and safe at once. For Sophie I gave small compliments about her photos, then borrowed her camera and returned it with a new strap and a note about lighting. They trusted me because I made trust painless. I rewired myself into the background of everything. Privately, I opened accounts. Not bank accounts, not the kind that require signatures, but online accounts. A fake blog, 2 anonymous social profiles with a woman's voice that was both intimate and maddeningly professional. I learned to write like someone who had been wronged. The English was slightly off, the grammar impeccable in certain places because bitterness refines precision. My online persona was C. Novak. A name neither mine nor theirs, a placeholder with a hard consonant that made people take it seriously. Then I started the slow public unraveling. I didn't do it all at once. You can demolish a building with one explosive, but the kind of ruin I wanted had to be like erosion, gradual and inevitable. I posted about fidelity, about secrets kept for the sake of convenience. I wrote essays about complicity, about how being a bystander is a form of participation. I cultivated an audience. People who liked the bluntness of my sentences and the cold logic underneath them. Some dismissed C. Novak as an angry ex, some as a critic, but all read. That was enough. I moved on to physical proofs. There are little things lovers leave behind. A scarf at a cafe, lipstick on a wine glass, a receipt tucked into a sketchbook like a pressed flower. My first physical piece of evidence was a Polaroid Sophie took at a gallery opening. Sophie's signature, Mark's wide smile, Sophie's hand on Mark's knee in the way that said they shared stories at 2 a.m. when stories are the only currency left. I found the Polaroid when I was cleaning Sophie's apartment one Friday, under a stack of matte photographs. It could have been a relic of their friendship. I framed it and scanned it into an image with the date on the back. Paper does not lie unless you paper it over. I released it carefully. C. Novak shared the photo with a caption about hidden economies of affection, and people speculated, which is what gossip thrives on. The comment threads became a living organism. Whispers growing teeth. But the storm I wanted was not gossip. It was legal, social, and irreversible. I needed to show that the relationship was not only emotional but transactional in a way that would affect their career trajectories. Sophie had a contract with a tech startup to shoot a series of portrait ads. Mark's agency was in talks with that same startup for a separate campaign. Conflict of interest, ethically compromised. These words are talismans. I knew Sophie's client liaison, an earnest woman named Laura whose moral compass was as sharp as her organization skills. I accidentally forwarded Laura a copy of the Polaroid and a series of carefully curated messages between Sophie and Mark that I had assembled into a narrative. I didn't fabricate events. I simply connected dots that everyone had the language to ignore, until I gave them a sentence that described it. Laura called Sophie asking for clarification. Her tone professional but thin with something like betrayal. Sophie lied. She said the photographs were friendship, that she and Mark were always really close, that it was a misunderstanding. Laura's confidence faded the way light does through glass. Within 48 hours Sophie's contract was paused pending an investigation. Mark was the next layer. I knew his boss, a man named Victor who favored order and metrics over feelings. I sent Victor an anonymized packet, screenshots of messages, the Polaroid, and a dossier outlining how Mark had used professional meetings as stalking grounds for his private conversations with Sophie. The evidence was circumstantial but pointed. In the business world, a whisper is actionable if it threatens brand safety. Victor scheduled a meeting. Mark grew defensive, then frightened. His voice on the phone in the middle of the night sounded like someone who'd been told they were accused of embezzlement. His hands were tremors in my memory. When the agency began an internal review, Mark reached for me. He sent me messages that said things like, "I didn't mean for this to hurt you," and, "Sophie and I, it's complicated." I saved every message. Their vagueness was an underwater current I could ride. Complicated is a word lovers use when they want protection. I used it to build a case file. Their worlds contracted. Sophie, once radiant and irreverent, started attending meetings with a practiced blankness on her face. Mark lost his swagger. People who knew them began asking questions, measuring their smiles, replaying their behavior through a colder lens. The town is cruel in its curiosity. It loves a narrative that allows it to take sides. I allowed the narrative to favor truth without becoming a spectacle. Truth is patient. It performs better than melodrama. But my revenge could not rely on corporate freeze frames alone. That would be petty, and petty is unsatisfying. I wanted a victory that reshaped the landscape of their lives, not merely paused it. People think revenge needs to hurt in the moment. What I wanted was for consequences to be inescapable, threaded into their future. So I planted a slow-burning shame in their closest circles, their friends, their families, in subtle, irreversible ways. I reached out to Sophie's younger brother, Dima, under the guise of being a neighbor who shared memories of their childhood building. Dima loved Sophie like all younger brothers love a woman they imagined flawless. He called me fulsome and naive. I told him small truths, that the Sophie he remembered might be the one who kept secrets, that people change when they keep two lives. He was defensive, and I didn't push. Instead I gave him a photograph I found. A picture of Sophie and Mark in a motel hallway at 2 a.m., the kind of snapshot lovers take when they're sure the world is only theirs. The photograph was visceral to Dima in a way words couldn't be. He confronted Sophie, who replied with fury and an assault of words that sought to wound rather than explain. Dima's disappointment was not loud. It reverberated differently, in the family group chat, in the messages he forwarded to other relatives, in the way holiday plans were tacitly uninvited. Mark's parents, whom he idolized, started asking questions too. The dissolution of admiration is worse than the loss of affection. It turns the idol into a calculation of disappointments. When Mark's mother asked me if it was true, I told her exactly what I had told Dima, the truth, indigestible and precise. She cried a single long cry over the phone. Later she said she couldn't watch Mark's social feeds the way she used to. I didn't relish their pain. Revenge is not happiness. It is a methodical reclamation. Every time a relationship shifted because of something I'd done, I tasted a strange dryness. There was no gloating. There was only this quiet arithmetic. Cause, effect, consequence. Everything progressed like a machine wound tight. Then the part of me that had planned everything began to crack. Revenge requires a different skin. It changes you. I started waking up at 3 a.m., thinking of small things. Of the way Sophie used to press her thumb against a coffee mug when she was nervous. Of Mark's habit of rehearsing apologies like scripts. Of my own hands tracing the rim of my wine glass as if I might carve a message into it. The cruelty of my campaign sat in my mouth like a metal aftertaste. And then came the moment I hadn't planned for. When Mark, in a desperate attempt to save himself, pushed back in a way that blurred lines I thought I had controlled. He hired a private investigator, a practical man named Roman with tired eyes and a ledger for favors. Roman found out about C. Novak very quickly. He traced IPs, followed the digital footprints. He found my anonymous blog comments and pieced together my voice from the slimmest of clues. That night, he knocked on my door. His presence was not a threat. It was a mirror. He didn't come with threats or braggadocio. He came with dossiers, screenshots of my C. Novak posts, compiled evidence of my communications with Mark and Sophie, a chronology of emails and transfers of files that made me look like a vengeful saboteur. In the ledger of his eyes, I read the transaction. A job for money, a solution for a problem. Roman offered a deal. He would bury the trail, anonymize the evidence, if I paid him a quiet sum and agreed to never interfere again. He spoke in practicalities, the language of people who measure misdeeds with currency. It should have been easy to say no. It was not. If revenge has its own logic, it also has its accountants. The cost of anonymity on the other side, what it would mean to let them go free, was steep. I knew that if I paid Roman, Mark and Sophie would likely return to the theaters of their lives. Sophie with her camera, Mark with his swagger. The consequence of their betrayal would be muted, the lesson lost. I imagined them stitching themselves back together into a facade, the edges of their deception hidden and sharpened for their convenience. Paying Roman would make me complicit in their absolution. I could not do that. I refused. Roman left with the same tiredness he had arrived with. He told me as he closed the door that I had been thorough. That was both praise and accusation. He left me with the knowledge that my anonymity was compromised, and that if I pressed forward, the fight might become messy in ways I hadn't foreseen. So I changed the plan. If my tracks could be exposed, I decided to engineer the exposure on my own terms, making it impossible for them to hide behind legal smokescreens or paid silence. It was time for the finale to be theatrical but precise. I would make the reveal something they could not deny and something that would leave them with the only currency that mattered, the truth in the hands of everyone who mattered. The stage, a charity gala at the museum where Mark's agency was the primary sponsor and Sophie had been contracted to photograph the event. The guest list read like their social lives. Colleagues, clients, friends. I rented a small booth in the basement under a false name, a recording installation for a non-existent artist. The installation would feature what looked like an intimate audio exhibit. Ambient sounds, whispered confessions played through headphones. People expected art that asked uncomfortable questions. They expected vulnerability they could observe at a safe distance. Inside the booth I had a small speaker and a looped audio track I had edited myself. It contained pieces of recorded conversations. Not fabricated, not illegally recorded, but snippets from video calls they had made where they forgot to mute or where their laughter bled through the mic. I had taken my time to collect them. The messages, the voicemail fragments, the evenings when they thought no one else was listening. I had the Polaroid projected behind a translucent screen, the picture large enough to be undeniable. The night of the gala, I wore a dress I hadn't worn in years. Black, simple, like armor. The museum smelled of perfume and disinfectant, of marble and quiet victories. Guests mingled under soft lights as waiters passed platters whose names I didn't care about. I sat in a corner booth pretending to be the curator's assistant, my badge of forgery I had practiced wearing. Sophie smiled when she saw me, the way people smile at the past. fond and slightly guilty. Mark's face was a photograph of composure. I waited until the program hit its midpoint, when speeches made people look pious and anxious together. Then I flicked the switch. The audio installation began playing into the museum's network, a soft hiss, then a voice I knew well saying, "We can meet at the back room after the show." The words were mundane in isolation, monstrous in context. Heads turned. People moved toward the sound as if the human body had an instinct to circle center stage. The projection behind the screen unfurled like a truth that could not be re-hidden. The Polaroid. It was there in towering detail, Sophie's hand on Mark's knee as bright as a badge. The audio played more fragments, a plan for a hidden weekend, a confession about being tired of pretending, a laughing, "Let's tell Anya we were at the studio," that hung in the air like poison. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The room filled with an angry, stunned silence that was a more effective punishment than any scream. People who had only ever known the surface of them now saw the seam. Some people covered their mouths with the backs of their hands. Others turned and left, unwilling to witness a public unmasking. Sophie ran from the room. Mark stood frozen, the kind of frozen that fines you for composure later. Their friends looked at them as if they were criminals. Their colleagues saw risk in partnership and changed their yes to a cautious maybe. The agency placed Mark on immediate leave when clients called to complain. Sophie's suspended contract became a cancellation. They called me obscene names later in text messages and emails. They cried into pillows the way people do when they remember every indulgence that led to an outcome. I watched it all, an observer who had somehow become the director, and I felt hollow and whole in the same measure. The aftermath was slow and unromantic. There were legal questions, privacy complaints, angry emails filed with the museum, an investigation into how I had managed the projection. I had covered my tracks meticulously, the booth registration, the anonymous domain, the way I had staged the audio as public art. No one could prove malice, only motive. Motive is a poor substitute for evidence in the eye of the law. But the social consequences were already in motion. Friends withdrew invitations. Sophie's brother stopped answering her calls. Mark's mother wrote me a letter, the sort of letter that is both accusation and plea. She asked me to consider mercy. I read it on a bench by the river and thought of the time she had cried and swore she would stand by him. The letter made me dizzy for a minute. It revealed the human cost of the machine I had set in motion. For a second I thought maybe I had gone too far. You never know the edge of what you've done until you see it reflected in the faces of other people. For a week I avoided the news, then watched as the story spread. Anonymous vigilante exposes local couple, read one headline. Artistic protest or harassment? Asked another. The moral calculus varied by the shade of the reader's own conscience. Some called me a hero. Others called me monstrous. The truth sat somewhere stratified in both. In the quiet after, they tried to rebuild. Sophie took a job far away, shuttering her Instagram and changing her number. Mark moved in with a cousin for a while, then started freelance consulting in a company that didn't mind a tarnished past. Their careers would recover because the world is pragmatic. A recalled product can be rebranded. But the personal lives they had known, the dinners with the same friends, the couple selfies in silly hats, those were gone. And I kept a small private ledger of that fact because it was the payment I had demanded. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I thought the adrenaline would be an anthem. But revenge is quieter than victory. It is not the cinematic revenge people imagine, the shouted confessions and dramatic falls. It is precisely the opposite. The slow compaction of consequences into someone else's future. The night I felt it most was a month after the gala, sitting on my apartment floor with the Polaroid in my hands. I had expected rage to taste like something fierce. Instead it tasted like copper and exhaustion. Then Sophie texted me. It was a single sentence. Why did you do it? No accusation. Only a question. Her words cut differently than the viral threads and the gossip. Questions are small tools. They pry inside and reveal the marrow. I could have sent her back the same rhetorical ammunition. Because you deserved it, or because you left me no choice. Instead I wrote the truth, the tiniest shard of it, the one that would hurt less than everything and more than nothing. Because I wanted you to understand what it feels like when your choices ripple beyond you, I wrote. Because I wanted to stop being the person who forgave to keep a house standing. Because I needed to take back my voice. She replied with several messages that arrived like shards, each one a small admission. She wrote about loneliness and habit, About being afraid to be alone even when the consequence was hurting someone she loved. Mark didn't text back. I don't know if he ever did. Their silence was an answer in its own way. Later someone asked me, "Did you win?" It was a journalist, a friend of a friend who had been kind enough to ask well. I thought of how their lives had shifted like tectonic plates. I thought of the small acts of courage my plan had required, and the small betrayals my plan had precipitated. Victory, I realized, was not a trophy. It was a different life I had to learn to inhabit. The life I inherited was quieter. People I thought would stand by me wavered. Some admired me from a safe distance. Others avoided me. I lost friendships and made new boundaries. I learned to be specific when I said no, to name what I wanted instead of letting the air fill with assumptions. I started therapy because the nights of mania had left bruises I could not see. My therapist, a practical woman named Marta with short hair and a judgmental smile, told me that revenge often fills the hole of shame for a while but never repairs it. Revenge is a lesson, she said once. But it's taught by fire. I don't regret what I did. Regret implies a different relationship to the past, as if a different decision would have mitigated the outcome. If I'd chosen to leave, someone else might have been hurt later. If I'd asked for honesty openly, maybe they would have given it. People say honesty should be demanded. Sometimes it must be engineered. There are nights when the image of the Polaroid returns to me unbidden, the way Sophie's hand lay on Mark's knee like a signature. Sometimes I think of the younger me, the Anya who sat in lecture halls and took notes on other people's lives, the Anya who believed being hurt by love was an inevitable cost. That Anya would be surprised at how meticulous and cold I became, shocked at the degree to which I could choreograph ruin. But here's a fundamental truth I learned. When you decide to become the instrument of your own restoration, you are no longer purely a victim. That change is liberating and dangerous in equal measure. It gives you agency and takes pieces of your softness as a toll. When I walk down the street now, people sometimes look at me and smile politely. They do not know what I did. They assume my life is ordinary. Perhaps I'm kinder in ways I never used to be. Perhaps cruelty sits inside me like a memory I will sometimes visit to remind myself of the cost. The night the museum projected the Polaroid, the city learned my name in a manner I had not intended. The name stuck to me like a label on a jar. If there is a lesson in this, it is not that revenge is righteous or morally pure. It is that sometimes reclamation is messy and expensive, and sometimes the one who takes the biggest cut is the one who asked for it all along. I won in the sense that Mark and Sophie could no longer wear their betrayal as an invisible garment. The price they paid was a future unmarred by public hypocrisy. The price I paid was more complicated. The knowledge that to take back a life, you sometimes have to dismantle other lives, even the ones you loved. If you ask me now whether I would do it again, I would hesitate. I would say that the truth is nuanced. I would say that you should not mistake deliberation for certainty. But if someone you loved dissolved into someone else's convenience, if your days became measured by the sound of other people's laughter you were never invited into, then you would understand why someone would choose to be the instrument of consequence rather than remain a note in someone else's chorus. We are not monsters for defending ourselves, but we are changed. I am Anya Petrov, and I broke their lie so it would stay broken. The pieces are still sharp. I keep them in a box on my shelf and take them out sometimes, not to replay the hurt, but to remind myself that the person I am now is someone who survived the calculus of betrayal and chose, with a cruelty and a mercy mixed together, to fight back.